We are living in a climate emergency. The latest IPCC report warned that without immediate and deep action to limit emissions, we won't be able to keep global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees and perhaps not even to 2 degrees. The threat of climate catastrophe is here, and it's not going anywhere. This in the same year that scientists recorded temperatures in the Arctic 30 degrees above the seasonal norm and 40 degrees above it in Antarctica. So just listen to that again. 30 degrees and 40 degrees above the seasonal average, and yet not much seems to be changing besides the weather, which is why activists from Just Stop Oil have been blockading oil terminals in locations across England since the beginning of April. There have been more than 300 arrests so far. And Extinction Rebellion organised a number of actions too. They held a series of deliberately disruptive protests across London over the weekend. They closed off 2 bridges for several hours and blocked Oxford Circus, causing traffic delays in central London. A member of Just Stop Oil appeared on Good Morning Britain, you know this isn't going to end well, to explain the group's actions. Well, what followed was like a scene from Don't Look Up, the drama where media commentators seek any excuse to avoid covering the reality of impending devastation.
I don't think any of us want to be disrupting people's lives, but I think given the science and the things that academics are saying about what oil is causing around the world and in this country too, this is the level of action that needs to be taken when our government is failing on their energy policies and their climate pledges.
But you'd accept, wouldn't you, that it's a very complicated discussion to be had. It's a very complicated thing. And this Just Stop Oil slogan is very playgroundish, isn't it? It's very Vicky Pollard. It's quite childish. Just stop oil. I mean, come on, there's more to say than that, isn't there?
I would say that the answers are actually very simple. We need to stop new oil licensing, and that's all we're asking. You know, with the oil reserves that we have now and the oil fields that we have that are still going, that would provide us with 8 years of oil if we said no to new oil, and that's what we're asking for.
But how do the blockades advance that argument? They don't, do they? They simply cause nothing but disruption, and you get a negative reaction. I've got to tell you, we were expecting to get some messages of support from our viewers for you. We haven't had one, not one. We've had nothing but furious complaints from people. Nothing positive at all.
I wonder if any of you have read the latest IPCC reports that have come out this year. Yeah. You know, what they have said is that we are on the road for climate catastrophe. We are on the road for 3 degrees of warming. This will happen to my generation, to your children's generation, potentially to your grandchildren. And I think we have a moral responsibility to act now. You know, we're supposed to be climate leaders. We're geopolitical leaders. We could set the way for the whole planet by committing to stopping oil, moving to energy efficiency, moving to renewables, moving to insulation. And I think the children and the future deserve at least that.
Well, I thought that campaigner was excellent. But what the clip shows, besides how inane Richard Madeley can be, is that he has little or no understanding of what Just Stop Oil are demanding, even though he was interviewing them, which isn't an immediate end to oil use, but for the UK to stop issuing new oil licences for North Sea excavation. Their argument is that the UK has enough oil reserves to cover us for 8 years, and that by the end of that period, we should have significantly reduced our reliance on oil. But Madeley wasn't alone. Rather than address the actual issue, journalist Lowry Turner took the opportunity to belittle the campaigners as well.
The one group of people have decided that they are the ones to save the world. And there's a certain po-faced, incredibly irritated, I'm getting it coming off in waves towards me here, like, how dare you question us because we know what's right. I'm going to glue my hand to some tarmac and then I'm going to be a martyr and I'm going to be a good person, while the rest of us can't get on with our days. I mean, you know, with respect, Miranda is 20. I'm more than twice her age. You know, I've got kids, I've got a job, I've got an elderly mother. We have to get on with our lives. Most people feel they're doing their bit. They are doing the recycling. They're trying. I can't afford an electric car. I can't afford a heat pump. Most people can't afford that. The people that the campaigners should be focusing on is the government, not on ordinary people. But it's about ego. There's no doubt that we've had a winter without any protest, but as soon as the sun comes out, it's eco-festival time. And it is a festival. It's a big jamboree. It's let's get on social media, let's sit down with a placard, let's advertise to my friends what a great person I am, while the rest, ordinary people who have to go to work, can't get to work.
When the cities are underwater, some people will still be complaining that ordinary people just want to get to work. What was so striking about this segment is the way that everyone except the activist seemed desperate to avoid the issue of the climate crisis, and the way they couldn't seem to face up to the scale of what's going to be needed to avert it. The focus was entirely on the temporary disruption of these protests instead of the permanent disruption ahead. Disruption came up again when Environment Secretary George Eustice appeared.
Can't these protesters, once they've made their protests outside the oil refinery or wherever, why can't they be moved on? Why can't they be arrested for obstruction? And the road opened up and the oil or the gas or whatever get out to where it's needed. Why are they allowed to blockade these places for hours at a time?
Well, we're in the process of making some changes to the law, seen by some as controversial and by some as affecting peaceful protest. The right to protest is obviously really important, always has been under our constitution. But it is important that you've got the powers to move people on when they are disrupting the lives of others and conducting protests like this that aren't just about making a point, which everybody understands and is a right that they should have, but actually are calculated to damage and undermine other people from going about their daily business. Well, so we're making some changes to them.
Priti Patel has said in this morning's newspapers that the Labour Party are guilty of obstructing changes to the law, which were meant to give the police extra powers to deal with these protests. But surely we've got those powers already. It's called the law of obstruction. If I were to stand outside a supermarket to make a protest of some kind and I was stopping people going in and out, I would expect someone to come along after 10 minutes and feel my collar. Why can't we use the existing laws, as I say, in particular, the law of obstruction?
Well, as you'll recall, Richard, there's been other problems. We did use some of those laws when we had people gluing themselves to motorways, which was a major public safety hazard. And I remember your programme covering that in detail last year. But what we were finding is even when they were being prosecuted, they were then returning and gluing themselves to motorways again. So the law does need strengthening in this area, in our view. And it is right that the Labour Party in the House of Lords have been blocking some of those amendments as they've been going through Parliament, as they've been debated. But we do think we need to strengthen the law here so that the police can move people on when they're doing this particular aggressive type of protest.
Now, Eustice was asked whether Just Stop Oil are correct in their claim that the UK has enough oil in stock to last 8 years, but he just didn't answer. Instead, he spoke largely about gas. Oil didn't come up, and there was no pushback from the interviewers. Imagine having the Environment Secretary on your show, it would be nice to have him here, and not pressing him on that key question. The focus on disruption only serves the Tories, turning the topic away from environmental collapse and towards their favourite subject, law and order. Here, Madeley just hands it to Eustice as an opportunity to boost support for the Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill, which will give police greater powers to shut down protests and criminalise protesters. The disruption caused by the blockades seems to have been massively exaggerated anyway. Fair Fuel UK is a pro-petrol pressure group. The Times reports this. Fair Fuel UK, which campaigns for lower fuel prices, estimated from anecdotal reports from supporters that a third of petrol stations south of Birmingham had run dry for a time. It said that Cambridgeshire, Oxfordshire and parts of Hampshire and Kent had been affected most severely. But shortly after that, the AA said this was completely untrue. The Times continue. The AA said claims of widespread shortages had been exaggerated and there had been only isolated problems. Edmund King, its president, said there have been some localised shortages flagged up by AA patrols, but some of that is due to extra demand with the Easter driving season starting and more staycations. Our 2,700 patrols have not reported difficulties in obtaining fuel despite some isolated shortages. However, the AA did say there had been a few incidents of panic buying by drivers who had seen warnings of shortages on social media. So let's get this straight. It's not actually the fuel protesters who are causing disruption. It's the people who despise the protesters who are drumming up panic buying by making up stories about how much disruption those activists are causing. And Madeley had the cheek to call Just Stop Oil childish. Well, The Observer did quite a good piece on Just Stop Oil, asking activists what they think about disruption. One activist explained it like this. People have been writing petitions, going on marches, speaking to their MPs, joining NGOs, and it's not just staying the same, it's actually getting worse. People across society are really angry. We've tried all the democratic means of creating that change, so now the only thing we can do is civil disobedience. It is upsetting to disrupt people, but it's far more upsetting to stay silent as we watch this horror unfold. If my brother woke me up because there was a fire in the middle of the night, I wouldn't be angry that he woke me up. On the BBC's Sunday morning show, Sophie Raworth also brought up the issue of disruption, this time by Extinction Rebellion. She asked Green Party MP Caroline Lucas what she thought about it, and this is what Lucas said.
I'm sorry that it's come to this, that this is the only way that people feel that they can make their voices heard. But I think when we're facing literally the Secretary General of the UN saying that we are absolutely at the last point, it's now or never when it comes to climate catastrophe, then absolutely I support peaceful direct action to try to get a government
and it's not
to look at this.
counterproductive.
Some tactics certainly are. I personally, for example, if you're going to try and stop tube trains moving around, I think that's counterproductive. I think being on the streets in London has been shown to be a way of capturing people's imaginations. People have joined those protests who've never protested before, and they're doing it because they know that we have to leave new fossil fuels in the ground. The International Energy Agency says that, the latest IPCC report says that, and yet this government and this energy strategy that we're talking about just now is foreseeing getting out even more oil and gas from the North Sea. That is frankly immoral. As the UN General Secretary said, it is both morally and economically mad.
A few months ago, journalists savaged Insulate Britain activists whose one call was to protect us and the planet from soaring heating bills by insulating homes instead. Now we face a cost of living crisis, and those activists don't look so silly at all. Ash, what will it take for our media class to take this climate crisis seriously?
To have a completely different media class and have a completely transformed media economy is the short answer. But I'm going to just talk a little bit about how the media works. Imagine that the public conversation, the arena in which we understand ourselves and the world we live in, imagine it's a swimming pool and we're all in it. Journalists, what they should be doing is making sure that that swimming pool that we're all in is as clear and clean as possible. That all the rubbish, all the crap, all the little floating plasters, it's not in there, right? It's clear, it's clean. It means that we're getting quality information that helps us factually understand the world around us. Unfortunately, the reality of an awful lot of media in this country is that journalists, and I mean people who write articles, people who commission articles, people who present morning telly shows like Richard Madeley, their job isn't to keep that swimming pool clean, it is to shit directly into it, to make it as disgusting and grotesque and degraded, foggy and unclear as possible, to stop us from understanding things correctly, but to be in such a state of fury and disgust and hyper emotionality because fundamentally all of us are swimming around in shit every day. And that is exactly what Richard Madeley is doing. And I think you also have to put Larry Turner in that light as well, who's got a very long career of writing absolute nonsense. I remember there was a piece of hers, I think from 2007, saying, I have a mixed race child and they feel alien to me. And so when you look at this context where journalists, and in particular morning TV presenters, who are sort of marshalling the public conversation every day, they're just sort of, defecating directly into our brains. And then you've got someone like, Larry Turner, who is the beneficiary of a pundit system which operates as a reward structure for bibbling idiots. No wonder you have a media industrial complex which is fundamentally incapable of dealing with the most pressing issue facing humanity at this time. And the reason why this is happening, it's because this structure has been designed in this way. And I think that if you want to isolate one person in particular who is the most responsible for this degradation of the public sphere, it is Rupert Murdoch. He is somebody who has marshaled his media empire in order to diminish, deny, and delay action on climate change. And because News Corp and News UK are such huge institutions, they exert this kind of gravitational weight within the media ecology. So I think that we need to see this as playing a political and an economic role, where instead of media helping us to understand the power structures which govern our politics, which dictate and shape our existence, the media exists in order to bolster, support, and protect those power structures.
I want to ask you something else about those power structures and the coverage of the climate crisis.
Sure, and I'm sorry for all the scat talk, by the way.
I have no idea what that means, Ash, but I'm sure it's something that people understand. Don't worry, it's fine. I'm very out of date. So we heard in that clip, Richard Madeley, I think, or they all look the same and sound the same, journalist contrasting ordinary people with climate activists. It's a contrast that is very common to the denigration of radical politics. Ordinary people who just want to get to work versus weird radicals who care 50 years ago about civil rights in the United States or 100 years ago about votes for women or today about the planet. So climate change has entered into that kind of register of the causes of the weirdos. Is that the fault of the climate movement? So we've got a comment, for example, on YouTube from Nicola Curtin, who says, we must have more of what Extinction Rebellion are doing. Let's stop worrying about inconveniencing the bosses, which is what they mean when they talk about inconveniencing people. But some very radical climate activists and writers like Andreas Malm have been quite critical of some of the Extinction Rebellion actions and have said they wrongly target ordinary people when they should be instead focused on targeting big corporations and states. I don't know how possible that is because, of course, we're all involved in the manufacturing of the climate crisis, even though very unevenly so. Big companies are responsible for 70% of global emissions, but we're their customers. Do you think it's possible to have a different kind of class politics of climate change? Do you think that climate activists need to change the way they're doing this? Or do you think that the counterposition between activists and ordinary people is just a kind of right-wing device that we're never going to be able to get beyond?
Have Extinction Rebellion done some silly things and things which I think are really stupid? Yes, absolutely. Do you have some kind of, chickpea eating yogi weirdos who really love turning up to climate stuff? Yes, absolutely you do. But you have weirdos in literally every part of organized politics. And I'm talking not just about the left, I'm talking about the Liberal Democrats, the Independent Group for Change. They were fucking weird. Young Tories, have you seen them, man? All right. Politics is ultimately a contact sport for people who didn't get invited to loads of parties at sixth form. And that's fine. I was one of those people. All right. Everyone's a weirdo. But I don't think you can necessarily comms or strategize your way out of that, because it will always be an attack line which is used more against the left. And that's because there's this very long history that you talk about of the loony left who are out of touch with ordinary people. And that was done on the basis of support for gay rights in the 1980s and the 1990s, going back further on matters of racial equality, goes way, way back. I think the thing which you have to understand, which makes this historical moment different in some ways, is that I think the entirety of political difference has become understanding politics as identity politics. Now, this happens just to be something I'm writing about in my book at the moment. But what I mean by identity politics is not just stuff like, oh, Black Lives Matter or, gender or trans rights. Identity politics is when you boil down every issue of political contestation into one about who am I, who are you, who is truly a legitimate part of the body politic and the demos. And that is exactly the game that's being played on Good Morning Britain. You hear it from Lowry Turner. You hear it from Richard Madeley. You are weirdos. That's who you are. You've got ego. You're trying to make me feel bad. You're a 20-year-old who doesn't know anything. You've got a savior complex. Whereas me, I'm just an ordinary struggling mum who's on TV every single morning spouting some absolute shite. It is taking climate change, which is really at its heart an economic issue. It is about the distribution of resources, the extraction of resources, the exploitation of land and labor, but it's boiling it down into who am I, who are you? I think that there is an element to which the left and the climate movement have to think about how you neutralize some of that stuff. And I actually think that some of the interviews in The Observer did it very well when they're talking about things like disruption. Look, if my house was on fire and you woke me up, I wouldn't be mad that you woke me up. You do have to do an element of comms. But the fact is that you are also always going to be demonized because what you're doing is a threat to the powerful and the wealthy.
Climate change is an economic issue. It's also an issue of imperialism. One of the striking features of the Paris COP conference was the starring role of the then president of the Maldives. In the COP Glasgow conference, we had the starring role of the Prime Minister of Barbados, pointing out that climate change is, like so much else, a problem cooked up in Western capitals for which the global South is already paying a particularly vicious kind of price. So it's quite disturbing that the image of climate action is global north middle class activists, this is at least the kind of rhetorical image, the media image, detached from ordinary people's concerns. It seems to me there's a possibility of reviving a kind of anti-colonial internationalism around climate, around saying our lives are more important than your profits, an old slogan from the French radical left that Emmanuel Macron is now weirdly trying to revive. But if you take that seriously, it's to say corporate profits in the global north shouldn't be made at the expense of flooding and devastation in the global south. So is there a possibility here in moving beyond an identitarian politics, a politics that is just about the defense of existing identities, to a politics of survival, of dignity, which has an anti-colonial and a class content? Is climate an open possibility as well as a kind of danger?
I think you've got to go back to my original image of the contaminated swimming pool. When you've been swimming around in shit for so long, the idea of dignity becomes threatening. And I think that's actually where a lot of people in this country are. The idea that you could stop being so angry. You know, everyone who's watching Good Morning Britain, they're inflamed and red like an ingrown hair. You know, it just makes you furious all the time. And the idea that you might do something which is rooted in the shared human dignity that we all have. The idea that because I happen to be born in the global north, I don't have more of a right to life or a stable existence or, you know, lower rates of infant mortality than if I'd been born in Bangladesh. The idea that actually, you know, there is such thing as a rising tide which lifts all boats, that you don't have to be governed by the values of negative solidarity, which is I don't want good things if I think somebody undeserving might get some of it. That idea becomes very, very threatening. And again, it is something which is produced. I don't think it's like a natural feature of human psychology. I think it is a mood which has been very much deliberately engendered by the media industrial complex. And it is one which is fed every single day.